Hi, my name is Megan Buchter, and I'm the director of the Fowler Center for Business as an Agent of World Benefit at the Weatherhead School of Management at Case Western Reserve University. At the Fowler Center, we run a program called Aim to Flourish. Its purpose is to teach students about the power of business to do well financially and do good in the world, and to teach students about the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals and how businesses can help to achieve them. As part of this program, every year we award the annual Flourish Prizes, one for each of the 17 UN Sustainable Development Goals. Today, I have the honor of introducing you to our Flourish Prize honorees for Global Goal number 17, Partnerships for the Goals. Today, we have with us Professor Charles Cho from York University Schulich School of Business, his student Heather Sharp, and NeedsList founder and CEO Natasha Freidus. I'm so honored to have the three of you here with us today. Professor Charles Cho, I'd like to start with you. Could you please tell us a little bit about your experience with Aim to Flourish, how it fits into your class, the course that you're teaching? We'd love to hear about how you've used it in your course.
Sure. So I found out about Aim to Flourish a few years ago at a conference when I met Claire Sommer, who was the director at that time. And when she introduced the project and the assignment, I was very fascinated. It was also right before I was making my move from ESSEC Business School in France to Schulich here in Toronto. And as soon as I joined, I started using it. I have to say I got a really great support from Claire and yourself, Megan. You were there at that time. And so in winter 2018, this is my first class I taught at Schulich. My class is called Sustainability, Accounting, and Accountability. It's a relatively small elective course, and the Aim to Flourish project, counts for 25% of the final grade as an individual assignment. And I emphasize individual assignment because it allows me in the class to balance between individual and group work, because they have a semester-long group work, and this one is individual, which allows them to really personally experience the project fully. Provide experiential learning, which we know has a lot of value. Asking them to contact the real person, the leader in the sustainable domain, to learn about their background, their inspiration, their experience, the innovation which they have to study. Allows them to learn via the appreciate inquiry method, which we also provide as instructions about the SDGs in more depth. So rather than going through all 17 of them descriptively, what I really like is that they get to choose the company and the person, and then of course they have 2, 3, 4 SDGs. They go in depth and what the company or the leader did in order to achieve those SDGs. So in a sense, it's a full course learning from the beginning to the end. Allows them also to have great networking opportunities, learning about a business or leader they maybe always want to know about, and part of the assignment. So it's been a very rewarding aspect of the course.
So I will say that I mention you all the time because your course also has a tie to accounting. And so when I speak to professors, I tell them about all the different courses that Aim to Flourish can really fit into and be used into. And yours is kind of one of those different outliers. So I use it as an example very frequently.
Yes, well, I have to say I think it moves away a little bit from the accounting topic per se, but it's very complementary with the other projects. As I said, they do a group project on studying a report in depth, and then they do this experiential learning, which is very different. And to me, it allows them to have develop the interpersonal skills, soft skills, these inquiry skills, and do it on their own. I was just talking to a colleague this morning, explaining the project, and I think you could do it by pair, but I wanted to make sure they do it on their own. That's really their individual assignment that they have to do, and they take it to heart. So another thing I've done a little bit more recently, I think on Heather's class, I didn't have a chance, but this year I dedicated a whole class for the students to come and share the stories in front of other students. Something I didn't have a chance to do, but I rearranged my schedule. I thought that the students, their classmates would like to hear what they found out about what companies, and that session was really, of course they have not much time because we have a limited amount of time and the number of students, but I think that was also a rewarding aspect to learn what my classmates done and learn about other companies. I get to learn about local and international companies and social enterprises and all these initiatives, which are great. Yeah.
Yeah, that's great. In a course that I help with, I also have the students give presentations on the company that they chose and did the interview about and the experience. And even though I get to read all of the stories, it is also nice to hear directly from the students about their experience. Speaking of experience, Heather, I'd love to hear about yours being a part of Professor Cho's class and then also going through the Aim to Flourish assignment, that whole process and what that looked like for you.
Yeah. So the class in general was really interesting and very relevant to what I do now. So it's really figuring out how to analyze and understand corporate social responsibility disclosures. So this was a little bit different than this final project, which again, but I think is also really useful because in that world and really everywhere now, everyone's talking about the SDGs. And I think this was a really good framework for looking at how you could actually apply the SDGs to a particular company and how they could have real impact towards those. So I think it was a really great example of kind of fighting against some of the impact washing that can come with a lot of talk to do with SDGs, because it's a really deep look at a company that's founded to meet that purpose. Very different than just, adding some SDGs to your corporate reporting and so on. So I think it really complemented the course well, where we'd go through all of the different corporate disclosures and look for those elements, look for what was a true commitment to sustainability versus really just kind of greenwashing or impact washing, as I said, and then finishing off with this capstone of a company like NeedsList that really took that purpose and that impact first and then built a company around that.
That is a really good tie, and that's really exciting to hear that this has really led into what you currently do. It's nice to hear that impact as well. How did you find Natasha and NeedsList while you were doing the assignment?
I was actually working on another project as well for a Mint competition, and a different professor introduced me to Tasha, and so we were talking about that, and then we got along really well, and I thought it was just an incredible company, so it'd be a perfect person to interview for this.
I'm always interested in hearing how students find the companies. I know when you introduce the assignment, a lot of times that's one of the points of like, oh no, I have to go out and I have to find somebody to interview. How am I going to do this? I run into that with my own students. I know other professors do as well. So it's always interesting to hear about how students find who they're going to interview.
That part, to me, I think one of the biggest challenge for the students is to find the company. I mean, Heather had a chance to find, in through networking and relatively smoothly. But I do see some students who struggle, who also put it off. So I really start early to tell them you really have to start early, because it will take time to find somebody who will want to give you their time to interview. So I'm also very flexible in terms of who they can choose, because there are some criteria, but sometimes they would go to overseas companies and they do it on Zoom. This was before COVID, but they managed to, sometimes you don't get to meet the company because they're not locally in Toronto. So I'm very open. And then sometimes they would have, sometimes for profit, sometimes not for profits. And it is a challenge. And undergraduate, I think, struggle more with that because they don't have the networks that the MBA students like Heather had. Also the personality and the experience that they may have. But at the end, I never had a problem with that, but some students have more difficulties than others.
Yeah, in the end, I do feel as though everyone always finds somebody, and it once you have that interview set up, doing the interview it ends up being very exciting, and it's not as nerve-wracking as students think. But a lot of times it's that, oh no, I have to find a company. That's really the hardest part. Heather, were you able to do your interview in person, or did you use Zoom or Skype?
In person. This was a little over a year and a half ago, back before everything was on Zoom, and we were both located in Toronto. So I went to the co-working space where Tasha was working and got to interview her in person, which was nice.
That's great. It's great to hear that you were able to do it in person. Although like Professor Cho said, even before COVID, we always encourage students that they could do their interviews via Zoom. So it's been pretty easy to adapt a lot of what we're doing this year to different situations at different universities. Natasha, I feel like we've been talking a lot about you and haven't gotten a chance to hear from you. I'd love to hear about NeedsList and what really inspired you to create this company, an amazing company. From what I've read the story. So I'd love to hear it from you.
Thank you. And thank you so much for this opportunity. And of course, to Heather for writing the story and Dr. Cho for providing the opportunity, because I do think that kind of real life experience and talking to companies like ours is really critical, especially in terms of supporting another generation of social entrepreneurs and other potential founders. So, yeah, NeedsList got started in 2016. We build software and solutions really designed to promote faster and more sustainable humanitarian action. And so by that, we're really looking at moments of crisis like COVID, natural disasters, humanitarian settings, that those moments where companies and the private sector are really looking to help, but nobody knows what's needed on the ground. So our tools aggregate and match needs from the ground from local nonprofits with private sector companies. And so we really like to think of ourselves as the technical infrastructure that underlies partnerships. And that's where the SDG 17 comes in. And frankly, I feel like it's a very overlooked UN Sustainable Development Goal. There's so much focus on some of the other ones, and people talk about partnerships in terms of fighting poverty or addressing gender equity issues. But the reality is there's been very little innovation in how those partnerships take place. And so we are really a fabric that connects the public sector, the private sector, and the nonprofit sector to coordinate and respond more efficiently, and not just for crisis, but for resiliency overall. And then in terms of how we got started, we really got started in the midst of the Syrian refugee crisis. I was living in France, and I was a first responder on the ground supporting local refugees, and completely struck at the lack of technology tools to support the coordination of folks like myself. And I come from a tech background, and it made no sense to me that I had to email people 40 times a day and say, no, don't bring that, bring this. And, our list became updated. So I actually ended up using a wedding registry. That was the first iteration of NeedsList, and realized the more I talked to people that there was something there. And the product has really evolved because we realized this problem wasn't just about local grassroots organizations. We realized that even large institutions like the UN and like FEMA actually are using spreadsheets and sticky notes and conference calls. So there's a massive need for innovation in the sector.
So is NeedsList used globally? I know you started in France, but now you're in Toronto.
Yeah, so I've moved personally to Toronto, but our tools have been used globally from the beginning. So we're actually in over 25 countries right now.
Wow, that's great. And so I'm really curious because you mentioned COVID-19, but how has NeedsList been used in relationship to COVID-19?
Yeah, so the onset of COVID really corresponded with the release of our new product. So we found ourselves alpha testing in pretty much the most extreme circumstances you could imagine. We said, oh my goodness, we're testing a new software in conflict zones, in a pandemic, in languages we don't speak. What could go wrong, right? But we had, our customers are primarily network nonprofits or foundations or public sector, anybody who's in charge of, coordination. And we got in touch with a nonprofit that was responding in several African countries and really interested in better sharing resources with local responders and with corporates that were looking to help in better ways, as well as local suppliers. And so we deployed quickly. We're responding now in Kenya, Uganda, Ethiopia, Somalia, and South Sudan. And we also set up a quick deployment here in Toronto. We had folks like IKEA Canada helping out as to matching kitchen supplies with local food security providers. So, in terms of COVID, everybody thinks about PPE, and of course that was the first set of urgent needs, but there's a whole set of underlying needs that have emerged as communities are really in continued lockdown and not able to work.
It's interesting. And the goal is to match needs with somebody locally.
Exactly.
Correct?
Exactly. Yep. So We're working with SAP now, who has one of their products, the SAP Ariba catalog, is a catalog of millions of local suppliers. So they've identified thousands of suppliers, for example, in Uganda, who are able to make offers either pro bono or highly discounted to local nonprofits around things like hand sanitizer and masks and gowns. And so that's been really exciting to see happen, because the traditional model of aid is really shipping all of these items from abroad, which even before COVID was problematic in terms of customs and import taxes, not to mention the carbon footprint of shipping these items and the economic impact of not purchasing locally. So our argument is, these providers do exist locally. We just need a better way of mapping and matching and identifying them.
And I'm sure time was also, if you're shipping something, you're not going to have it immediately.
That's right. That's right.
So now people can get what they need much faster.
Exactly.
Great. I love this story for our Flourish Prize winner for Goal 17, because it's not just that you're creating partnerships, it's that you're creating all of these different partnerships really all over the world to match needs with people or organizations that have those products or those items. I think that's wonderful. That's a really, really great way to highlight partnerships for the goals.
17 is not a goal that is often in the story. So over the 3 years I've done, I didn't count, but there were not that many SDG 17 based stories. So it was one of the a bit unique when Heather submitted her story. It was fascinating. I've never thought some company like this even existed. So I think that just put it on the edge and very rewarding as well. So I just want to point out, because SDG 17 is somewhat overlooked compared to what I call a big problem with hunger, which are all important, of course, but partnerships is not always as put on a spotlight as the other goals. So I'm glad that.
Yeah, and I think that's really true, and especially as you're looking at kind of almost SDG washing, as Heather referred to it earlier, whereas a lot of corporates and impact investors looking to, selecting specific SDGs that they're investing in. I actually haven't seen partnerships anywhere. And so that was actually a huge challenge for us when we were raising a seed round, was to find investors and partners that were really recognize the potential and the need for this kind of a solution. We did it, but it was, we had to get people. I think so many folks end up being very siloed, and they choose SDG 3 or 5, and that's their work. And really helping people think outside the box was challenging. Not to mention, actually, humanitarian aid and displacement, which were the two areas we were really focused on, especially at the beginning, are not SDGs, and that became a challenge for us, even though they, are underlying so many of the other SDGs.
I think it is overlooked, and it's really unfortunate because you obviously need partnerships to achieve all of the other goals, and to think that you should only be tackling just climate or just hunger and not trying to think of ways to build systems to do that, like Tasha is doing, is really an unfortunate way of overlooking a big part of the solution, I think.
Yeah, we do at Aim to Flourish have probably the least amount of stories about global goal number 17. But I also feel like when we get them, they're really good. And so, when we're doing the Flourish Prizing process and looking at the stories that we have around goal 17, it's one of the toughest ones for the jury to kind of read the stories and decide, because, once you found something that meets goal 17, usually, it's a really interesting innovation. Heather, I'm curious for you to tell a little bit about your interview experience with Natasha. How did the actual interview go? What do you feel like you took away from that interview? I feel like as other students might watch this, they'd be really interested in hearing kind of about your experience of the interview.
One thing that I really liked about your process was the idea of appreciative inquiry, so that you were supposed to kind of sit down and allow a conversation to develop. It wasn't meant to be so much just like, I have a question, you answer, oh, we're off topic, So it was quite an organic conversation. Again, I was lucky because it wasn't the first time we had met or talked, so I think that allowed for an even more organic conversation, where I got a really good chance to just hear a lot about the background story and the inspiration, and a lot of those little details that really makes the story shine through. So it was altogether a very nice experience for me.
Good, thanks. And thanks for bringing up appreciative inquiry. That is, even if we have professors that aren't incorporating appreciative inquiry into their classes, we do have that incorporated into those interview questions automatically so that the interview can focus on strengths and what inspired the organization and maybe high point stories of the process during the creation or being of the innovation. And so it's not focused so much on, problems that you're facing or challenges, but really on what's going really well and how you're working to solve, one or more of the global goals and how you're meeting those global goals. And I think that makes, when you're interviewing with a student, it makes, being that type of social entrepreneur or business leader feel more achievable than if you're talking to someone about the kind of challenges that they face every single day and you're not focused on what's going really well.
I have to say, for the appreciative inquiry, I mentioned it also in the positive sides of the project, obviously. But I think I don't know if professors will listen to this video or not, but I have to say your support and resources make our job quite easy for us to convey the skills to the students, because everything is there. I mean, the website is amazing. The resource that we got it's almost like, key on and then just open the door. Of course, we tailor it to our own classes, but the tools and the support and the appreciative inquiry, the video out there, I rarely had any even students asking me what is appreciative inquiry, which shows that means that instructions are very clear, and that's what we want them to learn as well, how to approach a problem, a discussion, a conversation, interview that way. So I think it's phenomenal the way you put the resources out there. So thanks.
No, thank you. Yeah, we do try to put as many resources as we can out there and then leave everything as flexible as possible so that professors can tailor the assignment to how they need to how they need it to fit into their class projects, whether they're doing it individually or in groups as part of a longer semester project or something shorter at the end or in the middle. So that it's easy to use, because we want as many students as possible out there having interviews with people like Natasha and getting a chance to hear their stories one-on-one or, in a group with a business leader, because it's so important to be able to hear those stories right from the source. Natasha, what was the interview like for you? Did you could you pick up on the fact that Heather was using different types of interview questions?
No, I actually am listening thinking I had no idea. But I remember it being quite relaxed because, like Heather said, we already knew each other quite well because she had done quite a thorough report and project about NeedsList. And so it probably would have felt very different if we had not already worked together, essentially. I just remember being, flattered by the opportunity and thinking, wow, there's a prize and a project around this. That's amazing. So, yeah.
Yeah, I think the prize and the public, at least everybody gets published. So that's an incentive for the students and I think for the company, because it's exposure and promotion and some kind of advertising, which nobody has enough of that on the positive way. And then the possibility of winning a prize. I know that before the pandemic, there was even a gathering of some sorts to meet, I think, at Case Western, but just having that recognition as well. Now I have, a couple of students actually who won prize. I can tell my future students, hey, you can win a prize even in this class, imagine. And well, it's not that important in a way that, of course, there's only a few winners because you have to make a choice. But just having this website story published, it's great exposure for everybody, I think, because you are bringing positive aspects of innovation like this. So.
Thanks. Yeah, I mean, the first goal is to be able to share and lift up these stories of these businesses. So we do try to publish as much as possible. And so, again, we're very happy that we were able to publish this story about NeedsList. It gives us a chance to learn about organizations that we haven't learned about before. And then we hope that other people are coming to the website to read stories and learn about organizations that they haven't learned about before. And then, yes, we do this prizing process every year. And, this year we're doing more virtual celebrations. But we have been able to do the speaker series, which has been really exciting for us and something different, and get a broader audience to hear not only about Aim to Flourish and the Flourish Prizes, but also to hear your story, Natasha, and to hear about NeedsList and how you're working all over the world for Global Goal 17 by, making these partnerships between organizations and needs. So we're excited to be able to share that and to have you on today to talk about your organization and your experience.
Yeah, and I think about the interview, I think the case of Heather and Tasha was almost by the book. I mean, like very professional, smooth. Sometimes I had students, as I mentioned, a challenge, and they end up interviewing their employer, sometimes their family businesses, sometimes somebody that they have never met or heard of, is just found on the internet or LinkedIn. And I think that can add some complications, but some excitement as well. So all interactions, I think, between the student and the interviewee or the business leader could be quite interesting and diverse. So I don't get a lot of the feedback. Maybe I should ask one day, but I can imagine the relationships. Somebody's like my brother-in-law or my family has a business in India doing this, and an interview, or I think it just brings a lot of different scenarios and diversity on the relationship. So I think it's great. Overall, you just get to meet people or learn about this person or this company from another angle. So
yeah, absolutely. I think it's a great opportunity. I would like, as Charles said, I think it would be interesting to hear what all the other students did, because I think in Toronto in particular, and everywhere now, there is really quite an ecosystem of different social enterprises, and it's really great to know what's out there, because if you don't know, it can be very easy to miss all of this activity that is happening. And so I think it's great to uncover that and to hear more about great companies. And speaking of which, since it's been a while, I would be very curious to hear some updates. We heard a bit about COVID-19 and how NeedsList is acting for that. But in general, I think in the last year and a half since I wrote the story, a lot has changed at NeedsList. And I've been following, but I'd be curious to hear directly some of what happened.
Yeah, thanks, Heather. Yes, we're a company that pivoted even before COVID-19 hit. So I believe when we spoke, the way NeedsList really started out, our original vision was to be the platform, like an open marketplace where nonprofits could come, where companies could come, and we had a membership model, and then their needs could be matched, right? And what happened was in the autumn, it was September of 2019, when Hurricane Dorian hit, we were approached by USAID, who was actively seeking a better tool for their response in the Bahamas. They were getting flooded by offers from the private sector, and they didn't have any good way to log those or match those with needs on the ground. And they said, "Can you help?" And we said, "Sure, we'd be happy to." And we basically spun up a microsite, like a landing page that was customized for USAID. And it was like this total light bulb moment, because instead of us desperately building that technology, reaching out to the corporates and reaching out to the nonprofits, we had a customer essentially who was paying us and already had inbound on both sides. They just needed a better matching tool. And we said, this is what we need to do. So we have moved to a white labeled model where we sell the software as a service. And so instead, we don't have an open marketplace. And one thing I found is it's really hard to pivot when you're a company, because people really get used to thinking about you in a certain way, and it's very hard for them to adjust. And they say, well, how do you know what the needs are? And I say, well, it's whatever you say the needs are. They say, who gets to use the platform? And I say, well, it's you decide who gets to use the platform. So basically we brand it and configure it and really license it out to these coordinating bodies. And ultimately, I really do think it will be a GovTech solution. In the meantime, we know government is not an early adapter when it comes to new technology solutions, and we've really been focusing on foundations and private sector and nonprofits, anybody who is in this coordinating role in the meantime.
Even more partnerships.
Yes, exactly. So that's the biggest change. And then we actually have done a lot of other work, I think, like I said, related to COVID-19 and doubling down on some of these supplier partnerships, and over the last 6 months as well. So like everybody, we've been adjusting. We fortunately were a remote team from the beginning. So in terms of the kind of human resource infrastructure, we had that all set. The majority of us are here in Toronto, but my co-founder Amanda is based in the States and our product lead is there too. So we've been very fortunate, but adjusting to not being able to go to conferences and travel has been a huge challenge for us. Most of our sales leads did come from speaking at innovation events or partnership events. And so we're finding it's just not the same to be doing that online, and you can't go, as we spoke about earlier, you can't go stalk people at the happy hour. So we're figuring out new ways to make those contacts and leads. And I know that's a challenge for everybody right now.
That's really interesting. And thank you for sharing that update, and also about how you determine who your customer is, or how you determine, what kind of problem you're solving for your customer. It feels so applicable to a variety of business classes that I now feel like you should be teaching.
Or taking.
Or speaking in. I want to give everyone a chance if there's anything else that you feel like you wanted to add, or you feel like I missed, or closing thoughts.
Well, I thought, okay, maybe, I don't know, I understood that I was supposed to ask something to Heather. So I was just asking, and I think you sort of gave her the question about how maybe I can ask two questions, like the most challenging part. Apparently the assignment for her obviously went very well, but maybe there was a challenging aspect of the assignment, something that, and then how did it differ from, or how did it impact on the program that she went through at Schulich, at the MBA program, in comparison to not only classes, but other projects within classes that she did?
One major difference compared to a lot of the projects that I did was that it was an individual project, which was different. In an MBA, you end up doing a lot of group work, and it's always nice, especially if it's based on writing, to kind of get to do it on your own and instead really work on, the relationship and the conversation with Tasha rather than all the team behind the scenes. So that was something that was different, and I think it's really important to incorporate some of as well. In terms of challenges, I think at first when you proposed the project, just the initial thoughts of who am I going to contact, where do I start, is what seemed challenging. And then I was quite lucky because, as I said, things kind of happened quite naturally, but I think that is certainly the place that could be the most challenging, because always that initial cold call, reaching out to people on LinkedIn or whatever you would do, is a challenge for anyone, I think. So that is certainly the part of the project that I think could be the most challenging. And then just taking a complex idea, a lot of different elements of a company, of a human, of a background story, and trying to make it all into one concise story that flows well for this purpose.
I think I always half a joke with the students, Toronto has a good ecosystem of those type of social enterprise, but if every year my students are going to interview all the business leaders and it's done again, because I don't know how, maybe it's something that can be evolved, and Natasha could be interviewed next year or two to see how it is evolved again. But fortunately, I think in Toronto we have these choices, we have this ecosystem where you can find potential interviewees as well. So whether you are in a different location, it could be a bit more challenging. At the same time, you can reach out online on the internet as well. So
yeah, that's great. And I will add, Heather, your story did turn out wonderful. I reread it before this call, and I was just that much more excited to get a chance to talk to all of you and to hear Natasha tell her story in person after, reading about how NeedsList started and hearing about France and the Syrian refugee crisis. And so your story is very, very well written and tells the story of NeedsList very well.
Thank you very much. I was lucky to have great material.
I'm just gonna thank you and to Flourish and Natasha for making one of the companies available to my students and former students, and Heather for doing such a great job writing story. I mean, there's the interviewing part and the writing part, and then the writing part is sometimes could be challenging. Heather didn't have a problem obviously on that one, to be concise, to be very accurate, to the point. So you don't want to be too verbose and with a style. So thank you for your hard work, and it was all of this being here, and even on the top icing on the cake to have the prize as well. So just keep up the great work. Megan, I'm just gonna say here, I just had actually great timing this morning. I was on a call it was a call in Scotland, and she's going to use it, so I'm gonna email you very soon. It's been spread on social media. She found out about it. So I think, yeah, that's one of probably the best assignments for sustainable education out there. So thank you again.
That's wonderful. I'm so excited to hear that. We have one other school in Scotland, so it'll be very exciting to have more schools in different parts of the world. It's wonderful how we've been able to grow and how professors have been able to reach out to their own colleagues to kind of hear about their experiences and then use it in their own class. I feel like I get more professors that have talked to professors that have used the assignment than now come to me to hear about the assignment. So that's really exciting for us. It has been an absolute honor to be here with all of you today. I am just so thrilled that we were able to find time to connect and get a chance to hear about how Professor Charles Cho has incorporated Aim to Flourish and how Heather's experience was, and to hear from Natasha Freidus about NeedsList and how the organization started and what it's doing now. So I'm so thankful that all of you have been here with me today, and I hope that you enjoy the rest of your day. And we're very excited to celebrate our Flourish Prize winners for Global Goal number 17. So thank you.